Hey everybody, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to talk about server status codes. Yay! This is something that I've avoided talking about just because it's configuration on the server side that we just don't need to get into when we're learning how to build a server and the whole request response cycle. But now that you've had a bit of practice, let's open up a little bit more on how do we configure the responses we send back. Because right now, for example, of our movie router, we're just sending responses, and that's fine while we're learning, but now we need to add a bit more to this. And let me show you what I mean. For example, our genre route that's throwing this error, let's go do this request in Postman and check the status. So I'll make this GET request without the genre. I'll hit send, and nothing happened. Oh, my server's not started. Here we go. All right, one more time. All right, I get my error. Okay, that's what we wanted. But if you notice here, it says status 200 OK. Let's hover over that. And Postman says standard response for successful HTTP requests. All right, so I guess technically this is successful because we made a request and got a response, but that's not what that means by successful. Successful means what you requested, what you intended to have happen, happened. And that's not the case. We wanted to search by genre, and instead we got an error back. So we need to configure this to say the status is that of an error, not that of a successful request. So here are the standard status codes we're going to go over. Now there are many more than this. And if you go to this URL, http.cat, you'll get taken to this website that has a super cool cat picture with every type of status code you'll find out in the wild being used. Now, to be fair, I've used maybe a handful of these. You'll end up using them all if you're a backend engineer, but we can get away with these 5 while we're learning, and it will help configure our responses. And this is important. Frameworks like Axios, libraries like Axios use status codes to know whether the response that came back should be resolved or rejected. Whether it should be a .then to give you the data or .catch to give you the error. So these are really important. Right now, an error is saying good to go, which would not be good. So let's start with 200. 200 means successful request. And while the GET requests are successful, if they error out, they shouldn't be. So let's go add the 200 status codes everywhere they should be in our movie router for practice. All right, starting with our GET request here. How do we set the status to 200 before we send movies? I know 200 is the default, but let's still set it just to show it. So the way that you set a status is with the response. You configure the response status, and it's just another method. So I can say res.status and then pass in the status code of this request. So now I am saying this is a 200, send the movies. All right, not too bad. Let's go add that everywhere else it needs a 200, so get 1. If we res.send found movie, that means it was found. Now I don't need to split it up like this. While I can, res.status 200, .status and .send are both methods of the res object. So I can chain these together. So what I'm going to say is res.status 200.send found movie. And that will first set the status and then send the data. Okay, one more. Let's do it on the GET request here. On the res.send, we'll say res.status is 200.send the filtered movies. Perfect. And that's all we'll do with 200 for now. Let's go back. All right, 201. This is a successful insert. And I'm also going to use this for successful update. Technically, you could use a 202, which means I took your request and something was modified. But we can also use 201 while we're learning. So successful insert, that means post request. We've added something to the database. Successful update, put request. We updated an existing item in the database. So in my movie router, I'll go to my post request. And before I res.send the new movie, I'm going to res.status 201.send the new movie. And let's test this out right away. I think we just need a title and a genre to match our other data. And we should see a status code of 201 instead of the one that we've been getting of 200. So I'll come over here and I'll do a post request to /movies. I'll give it a body of raw JSON. Title, The Mummy. Genre, let's say action this time. And send this request. So we'll hit send. And it comes back with our new data, and this is the correct full status code. 201 created. The request has been fulfilled and resulted in a new resource being created. That is exactly what we did, and the status code is representing that. Perfect. Okay, let's keep on moving. With the 201, like I said, we can use that for update as well, or 202. So I'm going to say res.status 201.send for my put request. Back to the routes, or back to the notes. 401 is unauthorized. So not one that we're going to need right now, but as soon as we add user authentication to applications, if someone sends a request they're not authenticated to do, this is what we're sending back. Some type of 400 error that says you're not authorized to make this request. All right, 404. This is probably one that you've encountered many times in life. Maybe you don't recall, but 404 is to simply not found. What you're trying to do doesn't exist. The web page or the endpoint, something doesn't exist. So we don't need to configure that for our intents and purposes, because if I make a GET request to something that doesn't exist, like /mov, and do a post, automatically, since that endpoint wasn't found, a 404 status was created. So the requested resource could not be found, but may be available again in the future. Subsequent requests by the client are permissible. But right now it doesn't exist, so 404. Great. And lastly, 500. This is a server error. This is something went wrong on your server. So we're going to use 500 kind of as a blanket statement for any time something goes wrong when we are interacting with our data in our server. So we've built two instances of where this should be occurring. In our movie router, if we go to our get by ID, here is an error where something went wrong. So let's set the status, res.status 500, and then return next error. And when I'm using next like this, I do need to write these on two separate lines because next is not a method of the response object. So I have to say res.status is 500. Now return the error to our global error handler so it can send it. But this is nice because the status is sent. This response and the response that we're seeing here are the same thing. So our 500 status code is being sent with the error. Let's prove that. Let's do a request to movie /some ID that doesn't exist. Do a get. Sorry, I should say movies. All right. And there we go. 500 internal server error, a generic error message given when no more specific message is suitable. That's great. Very generic. It's exactly what we're looking for. Something went wrong. And then the message can tell us more about what went wrong. All right, so let's go put that 500 error code in one more place where we have created our own custom error right here with the genre. Say res.status 500 and return the error. And we can test that as well. We can say movies, search, genre, and not provide a genre query. So when we send, it gives us the descriptive error message and the descriptive somewhat status code. All right, so this is expected going forward as well. Every response you send back should have its own customized configured status so that when we're handling things on the front end, it's at this point that you could go into your React app. If you've built something similar to this, you could go into your React app, such as I have here. And now, because the status code is 500, this will actually be the error, and we can find the error through this response right here. So definitely get some practice with that. Maybe even save the error in state that you create so you can display it to the user, and maybe like a little pop-up modal saying, hey, the thing you're looking for doesn't exist, or you must provide a genre, or whatever you are currently building. Try to implement at least one error code from the back end to show up on the front end. And you'll do that with the .catch. Perfect. So status codes, error handling, routes, all of this, we have what we need now to really build a robust server. This methodology can be expanded to build more and more. We're getting very close to coming lessons and courses where we can implement a database. So again, add this to your code, and when you're ready, let's move on.